Okay, shalom, welcome back. We are continuing on in this study of the history of Egypt and how it corresponds with the Israelite history. As I mentioned before, most of this information is coming from Emanuel Velikovsky's book, Ages and Chaos. I highly recommend this book. There's a link in the description so you can download a PDF version and read this all for yourself. So what are we proposing here? We've done several teachings on this. And so essentially what we're saying is that the period in which the archaeologists and anthropologists place Egyptian history is incorrect. So if you can imagine, this is the conventional timeline. On the top row there you see the history of Israel, the little ramp looking pinkish colored strip on the left there. That's their time in Egypt as they are increasing as a nation. You see that they come in during the Hyksos dynasty, and then during the New Kingdom is when the Exodus occurs. So this is what most mainline historians, this is how they place the intersection between Israelite and Egyptian history. But what we're proposing here is that the Egyptian history is placed in the wrong period of history in the world timeline. So whereas according to this chronology, the Middle Kingdom should be placed back in the period around the 14th, 15th century when Ramesses was on the throne, that should actually be brought forward to about 7 or 800 BC. So what we're proposing is essentially moving this timeline of Egypt forward and aligning it in its proper position in history to where the Exodus is basically the catalyst, so to speak, of what starts the Hyksos invasion. And so this would be the corrected timeline. This is what we're proposing. That would place Queen Hatshepsut on the throne during the time of King Solomon, and she would have been the Queen of Sheba that came to visit Solomon. The ancient Jewish writings say that the Queen of Sheba is not the land in which she dwells, but Sheba has something to do with the name of the queen. And you can see that Hatshepsut and Sheba, you have the SHE sound in the middle of her name there. And that may be the cause for her being called the Queen of Sheba. And as I mentioned, I just briefly touched on last time, there are inscriptions in one of Queen Hatshepsut's temples that actually pictures her going to visit King Solomon. She mentions it as a trip to the land of Punt, P-U-N-T. And in fact, even the administrators of the king of Punt that she meets, they have the same names as the administrators in Solomon's time. So the king of Punt is not mentioned by name. And there's evidence that Solomon may not have even been called Solomon during his life, that these kings had multiple names, and apparently in the Legends of the Jews by Ginsburg, he mentions that he references a statement in the Talmud that the name Solomon was given to King Solomon posthumously. So after he died, that's what he was known as, but during his life, he was not known as King Solomon. And that may be one of the reasons we have so many problems placing a lot of these kings, is because in the ancient Near East, kings would have 5, 6, even 10 names. So the names that's referring to the kings in the Bible may not actually even been the names that they went by during their lifetimes. So Queen Hatshepsut would have been the Queen of Sheba. She had a relationship of some sort with Solomon. Her visits to Solomon are pictured in the murals of her temple, even as far as her bringing back the gifts that are described in the Bible as King Solomon giving her these gifts of plants and animals and all kind of wondrous things to bring back to Egypt with her. So her son was Tutmose III. During the last period of her reign, Queen Hatshepsut made Tutmose III co-ruler with her on the throne. At first, he played a subordinate role. His name was written after hers. In pictures, his figure was placed behind hers. The bas-reliefs of Punt expeditions show the young prince as a small figure in the background, bringing an offering of incense to the bark of Amun-Ra. Later, when he reigned alone, Tutmose III became the greatest of all conquerors who sat on the throne of the new kingdom in Egypt. So we got to imagine what he would have remembered as a young boy during that Punt expedition. Did he go into the area of Israel and see the wonderful, wondrous treasures and such and so forth? And in his mind, he began to foster ideas of coming in and conquering this land and taking all this wealth for himself. There's legends and rumors of this romance between Hatshepsut, or the Queen of Sheba, and Solomon. Is it possible that there was an affair going on between Hatshepsut and Solomon that led to her son by another father being jealous or resentful toward Solomon and his kingdom? I don't know. We can only speculate on that. But for whatever reason, he did lead military expeditions into Palestine after the death of his mother. It says that his military expeditions were directed into Palestine and Syria. He subdued these countries. Some of the cities were vanquished by foes, others bowed before him. Vanquished by force. Others bowed before him, opened their gates, and became tributaries. The records of his military successes, cut in hieroglyphics on the walls of the great Ammon temple at Karnak, recount his campaign in Palestine and Syria. A list of 119 cities in Palestine is engraved 3 times on the walls of that temple. Each city is represented by a man with his arms bound behind him, and a shield covering the body of the man bears the name of the city he symbolizes. Another list, imperfect and in one copy, shows almost 300 Syrian cities as captives, also as men bound with shields on their breasts. So this temple, here's an example of what we're speaking about. So he's got all these cities that he defeated, the name of the cities on the shield, and it shows the men of the city with their arms bound behind them. Here's a drawing of it that gives you a little bit better idea of what exactly it is that was pictured. What did it look like originally? Because obviously after 3,000 years, the hieroglyphs are not quite as clear. But this is an artist's depiction of what they would have looked like originally. Okay, so the bas relief at Karnak shows the treasures in gold, silver, bronze, and precious stones that Tutmose III brought as booty from one of the campaigns. A series of other murals exhibit the flora and fauna transported from Palestine to Egypt. These campaigns are unanimously considered to have been waged in Canaan, which had not heard of the Israelite tribes. The places named on the list of cities are regarded as settlements of the Canaanites. The booty taken in the conquest contains the examples of art that flourished in Canaan long before the Israelites, led by Joshua, came into the land. So what Velikovsky's saying here is that because of the conventional timeline, they believe that this expedition of Tutmose III occurred before the Israelites ever entered the land. So they look at these pictures of treasures, and they think that these treasures are from the Canaanite tribes. and not from the Israelite tribes. So they see these treasures on the wall of Tutmose III's temple, and they are placed in the timeline of the Canaanites. Tutmose III, the conqueror of Palestine, was the heir of Hatshepsut. According to the chronological scheme advanced here, he reigned in the later years of Solomon and at the end of Solomon's son and successor Rehoboam. If the construction of history undertaken in this work is correct, Tutmose's victory march through Palestine must have taken place in the years closely following the reign of Solomon, and a record of it should be preserved in the scriptures. 3 adversaries rose against Solomon, and they began to rend his realm apart. So this is from the biblical history. It says the first of these was Hadad the Edomite. In the time of David, Hadad, then still a child, fled from Edom into Egypt and later married into the Pharaoh's family. On David's death, he returned to his country. When Solomon built the harbor of Ezion-Geber, the Edomite land was temporarily pacified. Hadad, Solomon's adversary in Edom, succeeded in stirring up this region into a state of unrest. Related to the house of Pharaoh and coming from Egypt, Hadad obviously was supported by the bearer of the double crown of Egypt. So you see this kind of setting the stage for the relationship of Egypt and Solomon's kingdom. Another adversary, Rezon, who fled from his lord Hadad-ezer, king of Zobah, became captain of a band and ruled in Damascus. Thus, these 2 legacies of the Amalekite Empire, Arabia and Syria, turned away from the house of David. And Solomon's 3rd adversary, Jeroboam the Ephraimite, Solomon's subject and servant, whom he made ruler over all the charge of the house of Joseph, secretly harbored the ambitious intention of making the land of Ephraim independent. Solomon, becoming aware of the germs of conspiracy in time, sought to kill Jeroboam. In 1 Kings 11:40 says, Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt as Shishak, king of Egypt, unto Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. So 2 out of these 3 adversaries are directly related to Shishak, the king of Egypt, and his plots, his ambition toward coming into Israel. So if we understand this to be Tutmose III, now we're seeing history kind of beginning to coincide, because we just said what Tutmose ends up doing. So when Solomon died, leaving the throne to his son Rehoboam, the conspirators backed the Egyptian king and were ready to act. It says, they, his adherents, sent and called him, Jeroboam, to be returned from Egypt. And Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spoke unto Rehoboam, saying, thy father made our yoke grievous. Now this begins the negotiation where they're petitioning the government for a relief from taxes. And of course, the negotiations end with the proclamation, what portion have we here in David to your tents, O Israel? So Israel departed unto their tents. This, of course, led to Rehoboam sending Adoram, his tax collector, who all Israel stoned with stones. Now, the reason they did this, of course, is because taxation is theft, and the people did not want to be stolen from. That would be all taxation. So, the annals of Tutmose III, after giving the date of the first victorious expedition to extend the boundaries of Egypt, records that now at that time the Asiatics had fallen into disagreement, each man fighting against his neighbor. Now, a victory over a foe weakened by eternal discord is a diluted triumph. Why then do the annals mention this discord in the land of Pharaoh's foes? The reason is because it was a work of Tutmose III himself. So basically, he caused this internal discord, and the fact that he records it is his way of gloating in the fact that it was because of his own interference is that he created this situation that allowed him to come in and defeat his enemies. 4 years had elapsed since Solomon died, and the Pharaoh already was on the move northward. Tutmose III advanced to the estuary at the eastern mouth of the Nile. In 9 days he marched across the triangular peninsula to Gaza, proceeding along the old military road. On the lowland of the coast, he had a consultation with his army and decided to go through the narrow pass to Megiddo, which his annals record as Makiti. Ordering the consultation with his army, Tutmose III said as follows: "The wretched enemy, the chief of Kadesh, has come and entered into Megiddo. He is there at this moment." So here you see from the annals of this battle, the records at the temple at Karnak, that he's giving the details of the battle. Now, again, I want to mention here, I guess it'd be a good place to mention it, that this is not all that's in the book. Like, I'm leaving out a lot of the evidence just for brevity's sake. I highly recommend you just get the book and just read the book. Like I said, the link is in the description. You can read it yourself, get all the evidence. But this is just kind of like a high-level overview. Velikovsky goes through the annals, just paragraph after paragraph, and links it to the scripture. So the siege at Megiddo began. Although the city was fortified by a very heavy wall, the garrison was unable to stand a long siege against the army of the Pharaoh, and they surrendered. Behold, the chiefs of this country came to render their portions, from the annals. The Egyptian army took 3 other cities. In the annals, the description of the end of the campaign have not been preserved, but it may be reconstructed. The results of the first campaign were the conquest of the walled cities as recorded in the quoted annals. The submission of the entire land of 119 cities, with the city of Kadesh first on the list, as appears on the city's bas relief in the Karnak temple, rich spoils of precious vessels shown on a mural also in Karnak. So this city of Kadesh, it was listed first because it was the primary city that was defeated, and the treasures from that city are shown on the mural. The most important questions have remained unanswered. Where was the city of Kadesh? Who the king of the city of Kadesh was is not even asked. How to find the name of a king of an unidentified city who lived hundreds of years before Joshua if the Egyptians' record do not mention it. So, as people have studied this mural and the history of this expedition, they have not been able to identify the city of Kadesh. Now, Velikovsky mentions that there's a city in Syria known as Kadesh, and so some historians have speculated that that's what it is. But then that raises the question: well, there's a mural of Syrian cities that were defeated. So why would this Syrian city be listed over with the Israelite or the Palestine Canaanite cities? Why would it be mentioned over there instead of mentioned in Syria where it was? Also, areas like Kadesh Barnea, which is mentioned in the scriptures, is theorized to have been it, but Kadesh Barnea would not have been a major city. It would have just been like just a town. So why was that mentioned on this list of all these cities? Something insignificant like Kadesh Barnea, or one of the other cities that bear the name of Kadesh in Israel. It didn't make sense as to why that would have been the primary city on this list. The second question puzzling investigators is how the name of Jerusalem, or Salem, or Jebus, as it was called before, came to be omitted from the most complete list of the cities of Palestine. A list comprising, it would seem, all the towns of importance in pre-Israelite Palestine. So why was Jerusalem not mentioned by Jerusalem or any of the previous names of the city? The third puzzle is the exquisite form of the vessels captured in this campaign, showing a very high degree of craftsmanship. It is surprising to find that the uncultured peoples of the Canaanite era were artisans of such excellent skill. In view of the documentary inscriptions and carvings at Karnak, it is thought that the Canaanites were superior artists in metalwork, and that Jerusalem escaped the doom of its neighbor cities, but the location of Kadesh remains a matter for scientific debate. The coeval history of Judah, short yet clear, records in 2 Chronicles It came to pass that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak king of Egypt came up against Jerusalem with 1,200 chariots and 70,000 horsemen, and the people were without number that came. The people were without number that came with him out of Egypt, and Lubim, the Sukkim, and the Ethiopians. And he took the fenced cities which pertained to Judah and came to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, against which the Pharaoh advanced, must have been the city of Kadesh. This one answer serves two questions: why Jerusalem was not on the list, and where was the city of Kadesh? Kadesh, the first among the Palestinian cities, was Jerusalem. The wretched foe, the king of Kadesh, was Rehoboam. Among the 119 cities were many which the scholars did not dare to recognize. They were built when Israel was already settled in Canaan. Antiquity was ascribed to other cities which were not entitled to it. So, for instance, the walled cities fortified by Rehoboam, which you can read about in 2 Chronicles 11:5, they can actually be found on the Egyptian list. So, for instance, it appears that Etam is Etim, Beth Zur is Beit Zur, Soka is Suk. So, like, all of these cities have names on the Egyptian list. Of course, they're transliterated into Egyptian, and sometimes they didn't transliterate perfectly, but you can match up a lot of these cities with the cities on the Egyptian list, according to Mr. Velikovsky. 2 Chronicles 12:5 says, and Shemaiah the prophet came to Rehoboam and to the rulers of Yehudah who had been gathered in Jerusalem because of Shishak. And when Yahuwah saw that they humbled themselves, the word of Yahuwah came to Shemaiah, saying, they have humbled themselves, I do not destroy them, but they are to become his servants. And Shishak, the sovereign of Mitzrayim, came up against Jerusalem and took away the treasures of the house of Yahuwah and the treasures of the sovereign's house. He took all. He also took the gold shields which Solomon had made. So the treasures brought by Tutmose III from Palestine are reproduced on the wall of the Karnak temple. The following short excursus is not attempted to be complete and definitive. It is only tentative. Yet it will demonstrate the identity of the booty of Tutmose III with that carried out of Jerusalem by the Egyptian king in the days of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. So all these treasures were not Canaanite. They were the treasures from the Jerusalem temple. Here we see a picture of the temple at Karnak. This is primarily the wall that we're going to be working off of. I could not find a better, I guess, a higher quality picture of the whole wall. I did find a few pictures that will give portions of it, so you can get an idea of what the degree of detail that was originally contained in this wall. You can see some places were damaged, and so inscriptions were taken off. Here's another view. If you'll notice underneath a lot of these items, there is like little notches or little lines. The lines represent the number of items. So, for instance, you could see like a vase or an urn on this picture with 3 lines under it. That means that there were 3 urns that were given or brought back. If you see like an arch, kind of looks like looks similar to like a lowercase n. That means that there were 10 of the items, and then the symbol for 100 is like kind of like a spiral looking line. So anytime you see a spiral, that's telling you that there was 100 of these items that were taken. So again, this is the full-size picture, and I do have a drawing which we're going to be using primarily, an artist's rendition of these pictures. So here is the drawing that we're going to be going off of all these treasures that are listed out. There's a little bit closer view of it. Okay, so on the Karnak bas relief, Tutmose III is shown presenting certain objects to the god Ammon. These objects are the part of the king's booty, which are dedicated to the temple of Ammon and gave to the Egyptian priest. This picture does not represent the whole booty of Tutmose III. He chose for the Egyptian temples what he took from the foreign temple. The material of which the objects were made is indicated by accompanying inscriptions on the bas relief. They were made of 3 different metals, translated as gold, silver, and bronze. The metals used for the sacral furniture and for the vessels in the Temple of Solomon were of gold, silver, and bronze. The cunning work was manufactured of each of these metals. Often an article is represented on the wall in gold and another of the same shape in brass. The fashioning of identical objects in gold as well as brass for the Temple of Solomon is repeatedly referred to in the Book of Kings and Chronicles. When gold was used for the vessels and the furnishing of Solomon's temple, it was either solid gold or hammered gold overlaid on wood. The pictures of the objects in Karnak are described by the words gold or overlaid with gold. So you can see that there is some parallels already with what we read about in the scripture for the temple treasure, as well as what we see on this wall for the treasures of Tutmose. So, a crown of gold round about was an ancient Judean ornament of sacred tables and altars. Such ornamentation is seen on the golden altar in the second row of the mural, as well as the bronze altar in the 9th row. So here's the one on the second row, and then here is the one on the 9th row. You see there's 2 different altars with a golden fringe around the top. The preferred ornament on the vessels was the Shoshana, translated as lily or lotus. The 1 Kings 7:26, the brim thereof of the molten sea was wrought like the brim of a cup with flowers of lilies. The lotus motif is often repeated on the vessels reproduced on the wall of Karnak. A lotus vial is shown in gold here, and in silver here, and a color stone here. A rim of lily work may be seen on various vessels, such as this one, and here also. A very unusual type of rim ornament found only in the scriptural account and on the bas relief of Tutmose III. Also, buds among flowers, his nopes and flowers were also used as ornamentation on the tabernacle. The motif appears on a vase in the lower row of the Karnak mural and also in the 5th row. Of animal figures, lions and oxen are mentioned as decorative motifs of the temple in Jerusalem. The Karnak mural shows lion heads, as you can see here, and also here some lion heads, and the head of an ox is recognized as an ornament on a drinking vessel. And this picture doesn't really make it out very well, but apparently there is a ox head there. Gods were often depicted in Egyptian temples in shameless positions. Among the figures of sacred objects in the Karnak bas relief, there are none of phallic form, neither are there any pictures of gods at all. Idols were and still are used in all pagan worship. The hundreds of sacred objects appearing in the mural were obviously not of an idolatrous cult. They suggest rather a cult in which offerings of animal, incense, and showbread were brought, but in which no idols were worshipped. In the Temple of Solomon, there was an altar of gold for burnt offerings. It was the only such altar. In the second row of the bas reliefs is an altar with a crown around the edge, partly destroyed but partly discernible. The inscription reads, "The great altar, it was made of gold." Another altar in the Temple of Jerusalem was of brass or bronze. It was square and very large. The 9th row of the Karnak relief, an altar of brass is pictured, the shape of which is similar to that of the gold altar. The inscription says the great altar of brass. Next to the altar was a table whereupon the showbread was. The showbread was obviously not a flour, but of silver or gold. In the book of Exodus, it is said that the showbread was made by Bezaleel, who was a goldsmith. Now, I almost left this part out because I'd always thought that the showbread was bread. And we know that David ate the showbread, whenever he was on the run from King Saul. But when I went back and actually read the description of the showbread in the book of Exodus and in the book of Numbers, it really almost, it could mean that it was made of actual gold and silver and not made of actual bread. So I don't know. Obviously, at some point they switched to real bread if they were using fake, silver or gold shaped bread. So I just left this in here because, I could see him having a point. So showbread is pictured on the bas relief of Karnak in the form of a cone. This cone is in the 7th row, and it bears the explanation, white bread, but the bread was made of silver. Also, 30 cones of gold and the 24 cones of colored stone were identical in form with the silver cone and also represent showbread. So Mr. Velikovsky is saying that he believes that this is that same kind of showbread that was originally in the tabernacle. And it could be maybe they had artificial, metal decorative bread, but also real bread set up in the tabernacle also. I don't know. But like I said, I thought about leaving that part out, but I just decided to go ahead and include it. Candlesticks with the lamps was an illuminating device with lamps shaped like flowers. These figures on the mural are candlesticks with lamps. One of them has 3 lily lamps on the left side and 3 on the right. The others have 8 lamps to the left and 8 to the right. The candlestick with lamps wrought by Bezaleel for the tabernacle had 3 lamps to the left and 3 to the right. So it would have been identical or similar to the one. We'll say similar to the one that's on the right side here. There were almonds, a knot, and a flower on the arms. Other candlesticks are mentioned in addition to those with lamps. In the book of Kings, they are described as bearing flowers. This form is seen in the 3rd row of the bas relief. The candlestick is in the shape of a stem with a lotus blossom. So here's some examples of candlesticks. Next to the altar, the tables with the showbread and the candlesticks were tables for offerings. Exodus 35 says the table and all its vessels upon the table, the dishes and the spoons and bowls, and has covers to cover withal of pure gold. The table, like its vessels, was of gold in 1 Kings 7. The tables of sacrifice in the 3rd row of gold and the 7th row of silver of the mural have sets of vessels on them, 3 flat dishes, 3 large cups, 3 pots or bowls, 1 shovel. Many tables of gold and silver and bronze are reproduced on the bas relief. The paraphernalia of the temple contained also hooks and instruments. In the 3rd row of the Karnak mural near the table of offerings, in the 2nd row at the left end, there are hooks, spoons, and other implements. Bowls appear in the midst of the rows, but especially in the 2nd and 6th of gold. So here you can see some of these different implements. Also, the incense altar and its staves and the anointing oil were in the temple of Jerusalem, and no detailed description of the form of this altar is given in the scriptures, but various objects of this form of altar suitable for incense may be considered. So Mr. Velikovsky, for instance, shows that one, and here's another altar. I personally think it would have looked more like the main altar. So maybe those 2 altars we showed at the beginning that had the crown around the top, I think one of those was probably the main altar, and the other one was the incense altar. But like I said, I'm just going to go ahead and include these that Velikovsky showed because it could be any of them. Also, vessels containing anointing oil are shown on pedestal altars. So here's one example, and then here's some urns where it's written that alabaster filled with holy anointing oil for the sacrifice. So you can see that this could have been anointing oil from Solomon's temple that was brought. Also, 100 basins of gold were made by Solomon for the temple. Now, 95 basins of gold are shown in the 6th row of the mural, and 6 larger basins are shown apart. So I mentioned these marks that are underneath the items. So you can see there underneath the items between in that row of double lines that there's the number of items are ticked off there as being 95 of the larger, 95 of the smaller gold and 6 of the larger ones, which is just one bowl off from the ones that it is said that King Solomon made. The walls and floor of Solomon's temple were overlaid with fine gold and garnished with precious stones. Pharaoh, who took all, did not leave this gold or these stones on the walls. Some of them were worked into jewels, and the inscription over these items reads, "Gold and various precious stones His Majesty had reworked." Other gold was taken in the form of bricks and links or chains. Chains of gold are also mentioned as having been in the temple of Solomon, and it says in 2 Chronicles 3, he made chains of gold. 33 doors are represented in the lower row of the bas relief, and the inscription says they are of beaten copper. 2 Chronicles 4:9 says, "Furthermore, he made the court of the priest and the great court and doors for the court, and overlaid the doors of them with copper." Targets or shields of beaten gold are named among the booty of the Pharaoh. These 2 Chronicles 9:15 says these 300 shields, together with the 200 shields of gold, were not part of the furnishings of the temple. They adorned the house of the forest of Lebanon, which I really think that the house of the forest of Lebanon may be, according to what I've heard from some people, that's actually like another name for the temple. So I don't know. But in the 7th row of the mural, there are 3 discs marked with the number 300, which means they represent 300 pieces. The metal of which they are made of is not mentioned, although some objects on this row are of silver and some are of gold. He thinks that these may be the 300 shields. Also, the ephod of the high priest, a collar with the breastplate, was not mentioned in the scriptures among the booty of the Pharaoh, and may not have been taken, but precious garments of the priests were carried off. The 4th row displays rich collars, some with breastplates. They were destined to be gifts for the priests of for the priests of Ammon. So he took them as gifts for the priests of Ammon. The bas-reliefs of Karnak, we have a very excellent and detailed account of the vessels and furniture of the Temple of Solomon, much more detailed than the single bas-reliefs of the Titus Arch in Rome, showing the candlestick and a few of the vessels of the Second Temple, brought to the Roman capital just 1,000 years after the sack of the First Temple by the Egyptians. Tutmose III succeeded in his plans. The kingdom of David and Solomon was divided. Judah bowed to Egyptian domination. The naval base at Ibn Ezion-Geber was no longer controlled by Judah. The maritime expeditions of the Israelites, accompanied with the sailors of Tyre and Sidon, were not repeated. So the temple was looted, and the treasures of King Solomon filled the pagan temples of Amun-Ra in Egypt. So just a few closing comments. It is worth mentioning that apparently the Ark of the Covenant was not taken by Shishak. It was left in the temple. That's the Temple of Solomon. That's why it's not pictured on the walls of the Temple of Karnak. And also, if you notice that the actual temple menorah itself was not pictured. There were candlesticks, but you don't see the menorah itself. I believe that if he left the Ark of the Covenant, he probably left the menorah also as sacred objects to leave in the temple. My belief would be that the priest and the king of Jerusalem, Rehoboam, they probably negotiated being able to keep the ark and the menorah in exchange for all the rest of it. But anyway, that's it. I hope this presentation has been a blessing to you. It's definitely something that's worth studying out. And again, the reason for this is because if we're going to, there's a close association with Israel and Egypt. And so if we want to better understand what was going on in Israel, we should try to get the chronology of Egypt put into the same period as that of Israel. And if we can do that, then maybe we can see the other side of the story and get the history that kind of will fill in the blanks as far as the scriptural account goes. And so I thank you for watching, and shalom.